Hello, my name's Al and today I'm going to show you how to service your Shimano hubs. To service your hubs, you're going to need some cone spanners, the right size for your hub of course, and if you've got an older hub you probably need a ring spanner to undo the lock nut on the end. With the newer stuff we've got a WH-RH610 wheel. You'll need a 5mm Allen key. Zip tie for removing the bearings, some good quality waterproof grease and some clean rags or paper towels. You can see here we're working on a bare wheel. It's basically brand new, so it doesn't have a cassette on it. You just need to remove the quick release. So we'll spin that off and we'll screw the nut onto the end so we don't lose it. And then we can get on with taking the hub apart. We'll start work on the non-drive side, so get the correct size cone spanner. In this instance, it's a WH-RH610 wheel set, and it uses a 15mm cone spanner. And in the end of the axle, we use a 5mm Allen key, which differs a bit from the older stuff where you would use a ring spanner. So hold the cone nice and steady and get your Allen key, put that in the end of the axle, and we're going to squeeze them together like so. With the lock nut loosened, that should just come off, and then we can spin the cone off the end of the axle. With that off, we'll lay that out in order so we know exactly how we're putting it back together. With this wheel, it's pretty obvious, but with others, you may have spaces in between the lock nut and the cone, so it's worth doing. Now we're able to pull the axle out from the hub shell from the drive side. And now we can remove the bearings. On a lot of hubs, you will have some kind of shield or seal pressed into the hub shell. Generally speaking, it's best to leave that in place because upon removal, it can deform and it's just not going to fit properly once you've done that. So leave it in place. It makes it a bit more fiddly to get the bearings out, but trust me, it's the best way. We're going to use a zip tie to remove our bearings here. You may be tempted to use a screwdriver, but it's best not to. Reason being, you might scratch something, and also most screwdrivers are magnetised, and you don't want to magnetise your bearings because they'll attract all kinds of bits of metal, which is not a good thing. So we're going to pick the bearings out. On this rear wheel, there should be 9 1/4" bearings per side. So make sure you get them all. On a front wheel, there'll generally be 11 3/16 bearings. So there we go, 9 bearings out of that side, and we'll flip the wheel over and do the same on the drive side. With the bearings removed, we're going to get on with cleaning the cones and the axle and then the hub shell. So here we have the non-drive side cone, and the bearing surface should be absolutely perfect. If there's any pitting or corrosion or any other damage, it's going to need to be replaced. With Shimano hubs, it's really important that you carry out preventative maintenance. If you look at your hub, once it feels rough, then you can be pretty much certain that there'll be some damage in there. So try and be proactive, look at your hub early, service it at least once a year, and hopefully you'll keep that wear and replacement part costs to an absolute minimum. With the cones nice and clean, we're going to move on to the bearings. You can use some solvent if you wish, but these are pretty damn clean, so just going to wipe off the old grease. On a rear hub, don't be tempted to spray degreaser inside the hub shell because there's a good chance it will get in the free-up body and that will wash out the grease, and chances are it will malfunction down the line. So that's the non-drive side, nice and clean, and we're just going to inspect that, make sure that there's no damage on the bearing surface. If there is, unfortunately, with a Shimano hub, it's time to replace it. So that's why the preventative maintenance is key. On the drive side, once we've cleaned that, we'll check that for damage. Now, if you have any damage on the drive side, you're in luck because you can replace the fluid body, and with a new fluid body, you'll get a new bearing surface. This hub's all fine, so we're going to get on with reassembling it. Before we fit our bearings, we're going to lay down a nice amount of grease on the bearing surfaces to help them stick and to lubricate them. Grease gun really helps here. And with the grease in there, literally stick the bearings into place. Make sure you get the right amount in there, and that they're all properly located. You could easily chuck one in the hub shell, so make sure they're all in there. And the same for the drive side. Plenty of good quality grease. So that's it, all 9 in the drive side. Before we fit our axle, we're just going to check that the drive side cone and lock nut are good and tight, because we don't want those coming undone. So grab your cone spanner, your 5mm Allen key in this case, and we're just going to check that they're good and tight, and they are. So that's ready to go back in the hub. Fit the axle from the drive side. Be very careful that you don't disturb any of the bearings as it goes through. Take your non-drive side cone and spin it into place. Next up is probably the trickiest part when it comes to servicing a Shimano hub, and that is setting the preload. So we're just going to tighten that cone down so you can just feel it touch the bearing, and then we're going to get our lock nut, tighten that into place. And lock them together. You can tighten those pretty tight. And we're going to check to see how that feels. There should be no play at all, or a very slight tick of play. If the bearings feel rough at all, they're too tight, and you need to back off the cone and retighten the lock nut. So that feels great. If there is a tiny tick of play, then that will be taken up when you refit the wheel into the frame and tighten the quick release. That will basically compress your axle, effectively moving the cones closer together and taking up that tiny amount of play. That will give you the least amount of resistance, so you can get those times as quick as possible out on the road. Okay, so everything's nicely tightened up, feeling lovely and smooth, fresh grease in there, ready to go out, hit the road. Thanks for watching, see you next time.